Under the blinding heat of the studio lights, The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon had all the polished energy of a well-oiled entertainment machine. The band had just wrapped a smooth, jazzy lead-in. The set sparkled, the cameras hummed, and the audience buzzed with anticipation. On the surface, it was an ordinary night in late-night television. But tucked in the shadows, away from the laughter and applause, an undercurrent of tension was building. The kind of tension that makes a room feel smaller, heavier, even when it's filled with hundreds of people. Meghan Markle had been invited as one of the evening's marquee guests, the kind of booking that would normally be a PR victory for someone trying to soften their public image. After weeks of quietly maneuvering through the press with controlled statements, charity appearances, and a carefully orchestrated wardrobe of understated elegance, this was meant to be a light, humanizing moment for her. A chance to laugh, share anecdotes, and perhaps remind viewers that beneath the royal headlines and tabloid rumors was just a woman with her own story to tell. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. She was dressed in a muted, perfectly tailored outfit. Nothing flashy, nothing that could be accused of being a statement piece, but still every inch the picture of style and confidence. Or at least that's what it was meant to project. Behind her eyes, something else stirred, a guardedness, a readiness to deflect. Years of navigating hostile media storms had taught her that even friendly stages could hide sharp traps. She knew this was not her turf. This was Jimmy Fallon's house, his audience, his rhythm, and late-night TV could pivot from charm to chaos in seconds. The first segment went smoothly enough. Fallon joked about royal life in the U.S., quipped about California weather, even teased Harry in a way that was playful rather than cruel. Meghan responded with the polished laugh she'd perfected, the one that didn't quite reach her eyes but was just warm enough to seem genuine to most viewers. Then, without warning, Fallon's smile shifted, the subtle cue that he was about to pull something unexpected. He leaned toward the audience with that mischievous twinkle and said, "We've got a little surprise for you, Meghan." She froze, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of her seat. In the split second before the curtain to the side stage pulled back, she was already calculating possibilities. A video montage? An old co-star? A comedy bit? It wasn't any of those. Walking out with that easy swagger, the kind of presence that fills a room without even trying, was Austin Butler. Fresh from his critically acclaimed performance as Elvis, riding a wave of adoration and prestige, he carried with him an energy that demanded attention. The crowd erupted in cheers, the applause sharp and sustained. Meghan smiled tightly, clapping as he approached, though the flicker of uncertainty didn't escape the watchful eyes of those who study such things. After a few moments of Fallon gushing over Butler's career, the conversation swerved. Fallon set them both up in a playful Hollywood Secrets segment, the kind where celebrities trade harmless, humorous stories. It should have been innocuous. But with one measured glance toward Meghan, Austin leaned into his microphone, that slow drawl curling around each word, and said something that would send shockwaves far beyond the studio walls. Well, he paused for effect, smirking slightly. Let's just say she's been known as a bit of an intimate plaything for certain celebrities. The way he said it, casual, almost tossed off, was calculated. It wasn't a joke that could be easily laughed off. It wasn't couched in satire or attached to a safe, obvious anecdote. It was a statement. The audience didn't quite know how to react. There was a split second of confused laughter, then scattered gasps. Fallon, quick on his feet but visibly unsettled, jumped in with a forced chuckle, muttering something about keeping it light before shifting to the next question. But the moment had already detonated. Cameras had caught it. Social media would seize it within minutes. Meghan's smile faltered. Not dramatically, not enough for the untrained eye to immediately notice, but just enough for anyone paying close attention to see the sting hit. Her eyes narrowed slightly, her lips pressed together as if she was swallowing something bitter. She recovered with a light laugh, trying to pivot, but the weight of the remark lingered between them like smoke after a match has been struck. In that instant, every camera angle seemed to close in tighter on her face. Every tilt of her head and shift in posture became a piece of evidence for the digital jury that would assemble online. People would slow the footage down, zoom in, dissect the expression frame by frame. Some would insist they saw humiliation. Others would swear they saw fury. A few would even claim they saw satisfaction, as though Butler had voiced what others were too afraid to say. The producers in the control room felt it too. The energy in the studio had shifted. This wasn't just a celebrity quip gone slightly too far. This was the kind of remark that would ripple through tabloids, morning talk shows, and podcasts for weeks. And depending on how Meghan handled the rest of her appearance, it could either fade as an awkward blip or ignite into a full-blown scandal. By the commercial break, Meghan had slipped backstage for a moment, ostensibly for a makeup touch-up. But whispers started almost immediately among crew members about her sharp exchange with a staffer, about her urgent phone call to her PR handler, about whether she'd even return to finish the segment. She did, of course, because walking off would have been its own media disaster. But when she reappeared, the warmth in her demeanor was gone. Viewers at home might not have consciously noticed, but the shift was there. The more clipped answers, the cooler smile, the slight tilt of her body away from Butler. Fallon worked overtime to keep the mood light, but the energy between Meghan and Butler was now an open wound, and the audience could smell blood. Outside the studio, the world was already reacting. Tweets were flying, hashtags forming, screen captures circulating. Some were defending her, decrying Butler's comment as misogynistic and uncalled for. Others were gleefully piling on, resurrecting old rumors about her Hollywood past. The digital tide was moving fast, and it wasn't clear which way it would break. This was not the night Meghan Markle had planned. What was supposed to be a carefully controlled, humanizing late-night appearance had turned into a public trial, with millions of people waiting to weigh in. And the most dangerous part? The line Butler had delivered was vague enough to be denied, but pointed enough to stick in people's minds. It was a strategic blow, one she couldn't easily counter without fanning the flames. By the time the cameras cut for the last time that night, Meghan was already in a private car, her team huddled around her, phones buzzing with incoming alerts. Somewhere in another part of the city, Austin Butler was no doubt being celebrated for another charismatic late-night appearance, perhaps even laughing over drinks about how easily a single sentence could dominate the news cycle. For Meghan, though, the night wasn't over. This was just the beginning of a storm. One that would test not only her public image but also her resilience, her strategy, and perhaps even her grip on the narrative she had worked so hard to control. And as dawn approached, the question wasn't just how she would respond. It was whether the damage had already been done. The hours leading up to the Tonight Show appearance had been anything but casual for Meghan Markle. Her day had started long before the cameras ever rolled, with a meticulous series of meetings, rehearsals, and quiet negotiations. For most celebrities, a late-night talk show appearance is an opportunity to promote a project or share a lighthearted personal story. For Meghan, it was an exercise in walking a tightrope over a canyon filled with sharpened headlines and rumor-fueled speculation. She arrived in New York mid-morning, swept from her hotel in a convoy of black SUVs flanked by discreet but highly trained security. Her team had already done a walkthrough of the studio the day before, mapping every entrance, exit, and backstage corridor. Meghan's stylist had laid out several outfit options in the hotel suite, each carefully chosen to send a specific message, approachable yet sophisticated, understated yet memorable. The final choice, a muted but finely tailored two-piece ensemble, was intended to make her look polished without drawing accusations of extravagance. Her makeup artist worked with a light hand, avoiding the heavy contouring that could be interpreted as an image overhaul, and instead emphasizing a fresh, camera-ready glow. Meghan understood the psychology of optics as well as anyone in the business. She knew that on TV, every detail, from the angle of her chin to the shade of her lipstick, could spark an avalanche of commentary. By the time she stepped into the black SUV bound for Rockefeller Plaza, she was in performance mode. A few quiet moments were spent reviewing talking points on her phone, not because she needed to memorize them, but because repetition gave her a sense of control. Her publicist sat beside her, offering updates about the other guests on the show, including Austin Butler's confirmed appearance. It was framed as an exciting opportunity, two high-profile names, a buzzy moment for the network. Meghan simply nodded, not letting her mind linger on what it might mean for the dynamics on stage. At the studio, She moved through the private entrance, bypassing the street-level chaos where fans and paparazzi jostled for a glimpse. Inside, the controlled hum of production was in full swing. Stagehands darted back and forth, grips adjusted lighting rigs, and the warm-up comedian rehearsed with the band. Meghan was led to her dressing room, a modest but comfortable space with a full-length mirror, a vanity, and a plate of neatly arranged fruit. She kept to herself as her team finalized hair touch-ups and wardrobe adjustments. Outside her door, she could hear Austin Butler's distinctive voice as he joked with crew members. He was effortlessly at ease in this environment, the kind of celebrity who could wander into a late-night set and feel like he'd been there for years. That was part of his charm, and perhaps part of what made him dangerous in a setting where spontaneity could turn sharp. Minutes before the taping began, Meghan was escorted to the wings. Fallon, all smiles and charisma, was already on stage, warming up the crowd. He thrived on the high-octane energy of live television, feeding off the audience's laughter and applause. Meghan watched from the side as the first segment wrapped, and the applause sign lit up. Then Fallon called her name, and she stepped into the bright light, the roar of the crowd washing over her. She shook Fallon's hand, took her seat, and exchanged pleasantries as the conversation began. They talked about her latest philanthropic initiative, about moving from the UK to California, about her children in a way that was careful yet relatable. Fallon had a way of making guests feel like they were chatting over drinks rather than under the scrutiny of millions. Then came the pivot. Fallon grinned mischievously, glancing toward the side stage. "We've got a surprise for you," he teased. Meghan's eyebrows lifted slightly, the practiced look of curiosity she wore when she didn't yet know whether to be delighted or concerned. Austin Butler entered to thunderous applause, the audience's reaction confirming his status as one of Hollywood's most in-demand actors. He slid into the seat beside Meghan, his presence a jolt of energy to the set. The three exchanged greetings, with Fallon steering them into a playful back and forth. At first, the banter was harmless. A few anecdotes about Hollywood premieres, light teasing about Meghan's move to the States, Butler's reflections on filming Elvis. But then, without warning, he leaned slightly toward his microphone, his gaze flicking briefly to Meghan before he spoke the words that would ignite the firestorm. Well, let's just say, in certain circles, she's been considered an intimate plaything for some pretty high-profile celebrities. The words dropped into the air like a glass shattering on marble. For a heartbeat, the studio seemed to hold its breath. Fallon's laugh came a fraction too late, tight and forced, his eyes darting between his guests. The audience's reaction was fractured. Some laughed reflexively, others gasped, and a few simply went silent. Meghan didn't flinch in a way that could be read as open shock, but the subtle tells were there. A slight tightening of the jaw, a blink that lingered a fraction too long, a measured inhale before she replied. Her voice was even, but a thread of steel ran through it as she deflected, saying something vague about stories people like to tell. Fallon jumped in to change the subject, but the damage had already been done. The remark had been made, the cameras had captured it, and the internet was already primed to dissect every frame. Somewhere in the control room, producers were already debating whether to cut the moment for broadcast or let it air, knowing full well that controversy was currency. When the segment broke for commercials, Meghan was led off stage for a touch-up, but the dressing room air was thick with tension. Her PR handler spoke quickly and quietly, weighing immediate responses against the risk of escalating the moment. Meanwhile, Butler was in the green room, grinning as he recounted the exchange to another guest, seemingly unfazed by the reaction. What made the comment particularly potent was its vagueness. It wasn't an outright accusation, yet it carried the weight of insinuation. It tapped into pre-existing gossip without needing to name names. That kind of remark is difficult to counter without inadvertently legitimizing it, and Meghan knew it. She had been here before, faced with an unprovoked strike in a public arena where silence could be mistaken for guilt and defense could be spun as protest too much. By the time she returned to the stage for the final segment, her composure was locked in place, but the warmth from earlier had cooled. She answered questions succinctly, smiled when required, and offered the occasional polite laugh. Butler continued to charm the audience, though the unspoken tension between them hung just beneath the surface. As the credits rolled and the audience filed out, Meghan was quickly ushered through a side exit into her waiting car. Phones were already buzzing with alerts. Clips of the exchange were making their way onto social media. For Meghan, the night was no longer about the carefully curated narrative she had planned to share. It was now about damage control, strategic messaging, and the fight to reclaim the narrative before it slipped completely out of her hands. Austin Butler's public image had been built with the precision of an architect who understands both structure and spectacle. To the casual observer, he was the perfect package, a talented actor with a string of critically acclaimed roles, a charming personality that could slip between vulnerability and wit with ease, and a certain mystery that kept audiences leaning in. His transformation into Elvis Presley had turned him from a promising young actor into a Hollywood fixture, the kind of name that executives mentioned in boardrooms when they spoke about box office guarantees and award season momentum. But this carefully crafted persona wasn't accidental. Butler had been in the industry long enough to watch peers rise and fall, often due to missteps in the unforgiving spotlight of celebrity culture. He understood how to navigate the press, how to give just enough in interviews to feel authentic without revealing anything truly compromising. And he knew when to deploy a comment that would ripple far beyond the moment it was spoken. In the weeks leading up to that Tonight Show taping, Butler had been on a whirlwind of appearances, premieres, late-night interviews, magazine profiles. The entertainment media had painted him as Hollywood's gentleman, a rare star who could charm older audiences with his respectfulness while captivating younger fans with his modern, understated cool. It was a careful balance, one that could be shifted by even the smallest public miscalculation. Yet for all his apparent caution, there was an edge to Butler that insiders knew well. He was competitive, sharp, and unwilling to let a moment pass that could be leveraged to his advantage. In an industry where opportunities to dominate headlines were fleeting, he had developed a knack for delivering lines that would be dissected in newsrooms and gossip blogs without ever sounding like prepared statements. His remarks about Meghan that night carried that signature style, casual enough to pass as off the cuff, but deliberate in their construction. Butler and Meghan were not strangers to each other's orbit. They had crossed paths at industry events, both connected through a web of mutual acquaintances that spanned from Hollywood to high society. In those circles, reputation was currency, and whispers could be just as valuable or damaging as contracts. Meghan's move from actress to duchess had fascinated the entertainment world, not least because it was an extraordinary shift in status that came with extraordinary scrutiny. For some, she was the embodiment of reinvention. For others, a calculated player in the celebrity game. When Butler walked out onto Fallon's stage that night, he wasn't simply joining another guest segment. He was stepping into a shared space where power dynamics were already at play. Fallon thrived on playful tension between guests, knowing that audiences loved to see sparks fly, whether they were born of chemistry, rivalry, or genuine surprise. Butler understood this instinctively, and he also knew that a certain remark, dropped with just the right inflection, could position him as the headline without him ever having to revisit the subject. In truth, Butler's comment did not emerge from a vacuum. For years, Meghan had been the subject of tabloid narratives that painted her as overly ambitious in her Hollywood years, hinting at relationships with high-profile men without providing concrete proof. These stories lived in the gray zone of celebrity gossip, unverifiable but sticky, lingering long after the headlines faded. By referencing this in such a pointed way, Butler wasn't introducing a new allegation. He was summoning a ghost from Meghan's past and placing it, fully alive, in front of a live studio audience. It was an audacious move. On one hand, it risked blowback, accusations of sexism, of taking an unprovoked shot at a woman in the public eye. On the other, it tapped into a truth of modern celebrity. Controversy often amplifies fame. For Butler, whose career was cresting at a high point, the gamble might have been calculated to solidify his reputation as someone unafraid to say what others only whispered. The audience's reaction in the moment told part of the story. The cheer that had greeted Butler's entrance softened into fragmented laughter and a few audible gasps when the remark landed. Viewers in the room shifted in their seats, their expressions caught between amusement and discomfort. This wasn't the harmless ribbing they were used to seeing on Fallon's stage. It had an edge, a bite, and it left an aftertaste that would linger long after the cameras stopped rolling. For Meghan, the comment was more than a personal slight. It was a public challenge to the narrative she had fought to control since leaving royal life. In the months prior, she and Prince Harry had been working to reframe their public image through interviews, projects, and partnerships. Every appearance was chosen with care, every word measured. Butler's remark was like a stone thrown through the window of that carefully constructed image, shattering the glass in a single strike. Butler's skill lay in the delivery. He didn't smirk too much, didn't press the point, didn't linger on it. He let the weight of the words do the work, allowing the moment to breathe just long enough for everyone to register what he'd said before Fallon shifted the conversation. That restraint gave the comment more potency. It suggested that he wasn't seeking to explain himself or soften the blow. It was a statement, and it would stand as it was. Behind the scenes, some speculated that Butler had been emboldened by the relative safety of his current status. He had a major studio backing his upcoming projects, glowing reviews from critics, and the kind of fan base that could weather minor scandals. In contrast, Meghan was in a more precarious position, her public approval deeply polarized. This imbalance made the moment all the more loaded, a star at his peak taking a swing at a public figure still fighting to define her post-royal identity. As the segment aired in real time, social media lit up. Clips of Butler's delivery were posted with captions ranging from shocked disbelief to outright mockery. Hashtags began trending within the hour. Entertainment blogs started publishing analysis pieces, complete with slowed-down GIFs of Meghan's reaction. The clip's virality ensured that it reached audiences far beyond The Tonight Show's usual viewership, cementing it as one of the night's defining cultural moments. What remained unclear, and would be debated for days to come, was Butler's intent. Was it a throwaway comment, poorly judged but not malicious? Or was it a deliberate strike, meant to stir the pot and shift the spotlight in a news cycle dominated by celebrity politics and royal intrigue? Either way, the outcome was the same. Meghan had been publicly linked to a loaded, derogatory insinuation, and Butler's name was now tied to one of the most talked-about late-night moments of the year. By morning, entertainment pundits were dissecting the exchange on radio shows and podcasts. Some defended Meghan, arguing that the remark was an inappropriate attempt to humiliate her on live television. Others insisted it was harmless banter blown out of proportion. But beneath the surface commentary was a deeper truth. In the world of celebrity, perception often outweighs fact, and perception can be reshaped in a single sentence. The atmosphere in the studio that night was electric in the way only live television can produce. A fine balance between polished entertainment and the unpredictable risk of something unscripted breaking through. Cameras glided on their tracks, the audience clapped on cue, and Jimmy Fallon moved with the practiced ease of someone who knew how to hold a room in the palm of his hand. Yet beneath the glossy surface, there was a barely perceptible tension, a thin thread stretching between Meghan Markle and Austin Butler from the moment they were seated together on stage. When the cameras rolled for the segment, Fallon began with his usual mix of charm and harmless ribbing. He asked Meghan about her current projects, sprinkling in light-hearted references to her time on Suits, the royal wedding, and life in California. Meghan smiled, answering smoothly, slipping between warmth and diplomacy as she fielded each question. Butler chimed in now and then with a quick laugh or a nod, the embodiment of a gracious co-guest. The audience was relaxed, laughing easily, leaning into the shared familiarity of seeing two high-profile celebrities bantering under Fallon's watch. From the outside, there was no sign of the storm that was about to break. Then Fallon shifted the tone with one of his signature surprise reveals. "We thought it'd be fun to have a little game," he said, grinning at both guests. "A kind of Hollywood truth or dare, but don't worry, it's all in good fun." The audience responded with an eager cheer, their excitement feeding the momentum. Meghan's smile stayed in place, but her posture shifted ever so slightly, a subtle tightening of her shoulders that might go unnoticed by most. She knew well enough that all in good fun could mean anything in the realm of late-night TV, where the line between playful and provocative often blurred. Fallon asked a few innocuous questions to warm them up. Favorite guilty pleasure songs, the most embarrassing moment on set, a celebrity they'd fangirl or fanboy over. Laughter bubbled through the audience, the energy buoyant and unthreatening. Then, with a smooth transition, Fallon turned to Butler. "You've been in this business a long time now," he said. "You must have heard some pretty wild stories." Butler leaned forward slightly, resting his elbow on the arm of the chair. His voice carried a slow, deliberate rhythm. "Yeah, I've heard a few. Been part of a few, too." The audience chuckled. "And you two have crossed paths before, right?" Fallon added, glancing between them. "Here and there," Butler replied casually, glancing at Meghan with a look that lingered just a beat too long. Then, without any further build-up, he dropped the line. Well, let's just say, in certain circles, she's been considered an intimate plaything for some pretty high-profile celebrities." The sound in the studio changed in an instant. A few people laughed awkwardly, perhaps unsure if this was an inside joke they weren't in on. Others let out sharp, audible gasps. A ripple of confusion and discomfort ran through the crowd, the kind of shift you could feel as much as hear. Fallon's reflex was immediate. A quick, tight laugh, the kind designed to move things along before the weight of the moment sank too deep. Okay, he said, raising a hand as if to playfully scold. "Let's keep it PG-13, folks." Butler leaned back, smiling faintly, his eyes still fixed on Meghan. The message in that look was layered, part challenge, part satisfaction, and perhaps a quiet dare for her to respond. Meghan's reaction was measured, but the micro-expressions told a more complicated story. Her lips curved in a polite smile, but her eyes didn't match the warmth. She let out a short laugh, the kind that could be interpreted as either dismissive or strategically lighthearted. "Well, I think people love to tell all sorts of stories, don't they?" she said, her voice steady but edged with something more guarded. The audience clapped hesitantly, as though unsure whether they were supposed to laugh along or acknowledge the awkwardness. Fallon quickly pivoted to another topic. A humorous segment about celebrity pet stories, but the tension lingered in the air like a faint electric charge. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged looks. The control room buzzed with quick discussions. Was the remark too risky to air unedited? Would they have to bleep or cut it? Or was it exactly the kind of moment that would guarantee viral traction online? Decisions like these had to be made in seconds, and in the world of late-night television, controversy often translated to ratings. While the segment continued, Meghan adjusted her seating slightly, creating just a sliver more space between herself and Butler. Her answers to Fallon's next few questions were shorter, her laughter less frequent. She didn't look at Butler unless the conversation demanded it. Butler, on the other hand, seemed unshaken, even energized. His body language remained open and relaxed, his gaze occasionally drifting toward Meghan in moments that could be read as teasing or testing. If the comment had been meant to unsettle her, it had done its job, at least enough for the audience and the cameras to pick up on the shift. When the segment finally wrapped and Fallon tossed to a commercial, the applause sounded almost forced, as though the audience was still processing what had just happened. Meghan stood, following Fallon and Butler off stage, but she didn't linger in casual conversation as most guests did. Instead, she made her way straight toward her dressing room, her PR handler catching up to her with a phone already in hand, likely flooded with alerts from social media monitoring feeds. In that moment, the gravity of the remark began to set in. Meghan knew the pattern all too well. The clip would hit Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram within minutes. Headlines would appear within the hour. By morning, her name would be splashed across entertainment sites worldwide, tethered to a phrase she had not chosen, a story she hadn't told. And somewhere, in a green room not far from hers, Butler would be laughing with the band and Fallon's producers, basking in the glow of having just created the night's most talked-about moment. Whether or not that had been his intention, it was now the reality, one that Meghan would have to confront in the hours and days to come. The weight of Austin Butler's words didn't just hang in the air because of the delivery. It was the meaning embedded within them that cut the deepest. An intimate plaything for celebrities was not an idle remark in the realm of public discourse. It was a phrase loaded with implication, carefully straddling the line between gossip and insult, between hearsay and insinuation. It was designed to evoke images, to summon an entire narrative without ever explicitly stating facts, leaving Meghan caught in a trap where denial could be twisted and silence could be interpreted as consent. The language itself was calculated. Butler could have used dozens of other expressions if he had meant to tease harmlessly. He could have said a favorite at parties or the life of the Hollywood scene. Instead, he chose something intimate, something that carried an unspoken charge of sexualized objectification. This was not a comment on charisma or popularity. It was a comment on possession, on being passed around in the whispers of high-status circles. For Meghan, the sting went far deeper than a casual insult. She had spent years battling the media's tendency to flatten her identity into a caricature. Ambitious social climber, gold digger, opportunist. Every interview, every charity appearance, every carefully framed photograph had been part of an exhausting effort to reframe herself in the public imagination. And here, with one sentence, Butler had invoked a trope that could drag her back into that same reductive narrative. The danger of a phrase like that in the celebrity ecosystem is that it taps into existing myths and half-truths. Meghan's early career in Hollywood was marked by the same hustle every actor faces: small roles, networking events, photo ops. But in an industry that thrives on rumors, such normal career moves can be recast as evidence of calculated seduction, especially when a woman's success seems to come quickly or disrupt established hierarchies. For detractors, Butler's comment was confirmation. For supporters, it was an attack cloaked in plausible deniability. What made the moment particularly insidious was the setting. Late-night talk shows operate under a sheen of informality. Guests banter, jokes fly, and offhand comments are chalked up to spontaneity. But that informality is also what gives such moments power. Because it was said in a playful environment, Butler could later downplay it as a joke, a misunderstanding, a tease between acquaintances. Meanwhile, the internet would circulate it without context, stripping away any qualifiers and leaving only the core accusation. The fallout from such a remark is rarely immediate in a physical sense. There's no audible boo from the audience, no instant collapse of the conversation. Instead, it works like a slow-release toxin. The audience hears it, laughs or gasps, moves on to the next topic, but the mind keeps returning to it. Social media, with its infinite replayability, becomes the vessel that carries the line far beyond the studio. Within hours, clips are clipped down to just the remark and Meghan's reaction, stripped of any surrounding banter, creating a version of the moment that feels sharper and more deliberate than it even was in real time. The people who dissect celebrity culture understand that meaning is layered in these settings. They analyze tone, posture, pauses. Butler's slight lean toward the microphone, the measured pace of his delivery, the absence of laughter in his own voice. All of it fed the idea that this wasn't a clumsy off-the-cuff slip, but something inserted with intent. Whether that intent was personal, strategic, or simply mischievous would be debated for weeks. Meghan's challenge now was not just about defending her reputation, but about controlling the narrative before it took on a life of its own. The phrase Butler used was sticky. It was easy to repeat, sensational enough to headline, and vague enough to apply to any number of imagined scenarios. Her team knew that if they responded too aggressively, it would feed the fire, giving the story another cycle of coverage. If they ignored it, they risked letting it become common knowledge in the echo chamber of celebrity rumor. What Butler had effectively done was place Meghan in the impossible position every high-profile figure dreads. The position where any move could be spun as validation of the original insinuation. It was a tactic that had been used in Hollywood before, often with devastating long-term effects. A single remark could seed a narrative that overshadowed years of work, a legacy undone not by fact, but by the persistence of suggestion. The moment also exposed the unspoken hierarchies within celebrity culture. Butler was at a peak in his career, with public goodwill and industry respect insulating him from serious consequence. Meghan, in contrast, occupied a space of constant scrutiny and polarized opinion. In the court of public perception, he was free to flirt with scandal in a way that could even enhance his dangerous charm image, while she bore the heavier cost of defending her integrity. It was this imbalance that made the exchange so combustible. It wasn't just about what was said, but about who said it and who it was said to. In the carefully curated world of celebrity media, these dynamics matter as much as the words themselves. Butler's comment landed in a cultural moment already primed to dissect Meghan, to project motives onto her, to see her through the lens of controversy. By the time the show wrapped, the phrase had already begun its migration online. Fans clipped it, critics pounced on it, and gossip accounts framed it as the late-night moment no one saw coming. And in living rooms and offices across the country, people who hadn't watched the show in years were suddenly tuning into that one clip, bringing their own biases and interpretations with them. For Meghan, the immediate task would be damage control, but the deeper wound was knowing that the remark's power lay not in its truth, but in its resonance. It was the kind of thing people would repeat in hushed tones at parties, cite as an example in debates about her character, or recall months from now when her name came up in unrelated contexts. It was an echo she could not unring, and it had been set loose in the most public way possible. The moment Austin Butler's words left his lips, the air in the Tonight Show studio shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. But Meghan Markle felt it immediately. The audience's reaction wasn't a unified roar or gasp. It was fractured, uneven, a mix of awkward chuckles, stifled murmurs, and silence. Jimmy Fallon, ever the ringmaster, moved quickly to smooth over the awkwardness with a joke and a change of subject, but there was no unringing what had just been said. For Meghan, those few seconds stretched into something much longer. She was a seasoned performer, well-versed in keeping her composure under the glare of cameras, but even she couldn't entirely mask the subtle tells that betrayed the sting. The small, almost imperceptible pause before her next smile. The way her shoulders settled back against the chair, her posture slightly more guarded. A quick glance to Fallon, as though weighing whether he would steer the conversation to safer waters, before she looked back toward Butler with a carefully neutral expression. Fallon's pivot worked in the sense that the interview continued. Questions about light-hearted topics, a playful exchange about their respective pets, even a moment of laughter about an old Hollywood party. But while the segment went on, the energy in the studio never fully recovered. The audience's laughter was a fraction slower, and Meghan's responses had lost their earlier warmth. She smiled when she needed to, but the spontaneity was gone, replaced by precision. Every answer felt measured. The crew could feel it too. Stagehands in the wings exchanged brief, knowing glances. The camera operators stayed locked in, but more than one of them found themselves tightening their shots on Meghan, capturing the shifts in her expression as if instinctively sensing that the real story was now in those micro moments, not in the scripted banter. When the segment finally cut to commercial, the relief in Meghan's eyes was subtle but unmistakable. She stood almost as soon as the applause began, offering a polite nod to Butler before following a producer offstage. Fallon, ever the professional, stayed behind to chat with the audience, keeping the mood buoyant. Butler wandered toward the wings, smiling as he passed crew members, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Backstage, Meghan's team closed ranks immediately. Her PR handler was already scrolling through their phone, watching the first clips of the remark surface online. The makeup artist approached with a powder brush, but Meghan waved them off, focusing instead on the low, urgent conversation with her publicist. Snippets of their exchange were audible to anyone standing nearby. Phrases like, "decide whether to address it," "clip is already trending," and "don't let it spiral before morning." There was a tight 10 minutes before she had to be back on set for the closing segment, and every second was spent weighing her options. Should she make a pointed remark during her next appearance to reassert control? Should she keep it light to avoid drawing more attention? Should she confront Butler offstage or ignore him entirely? All of these decisions had to be made in the middle of a live taping, with cameras waiting just beyond the curtain. When she returned to the stage for the final part of the show, Meghan had clearly settled on a strategy. Disengagement. She offered polite smiles, kept her focus on Fallon, and avoided any direct interaction with Butler unless prompted. She was still gracious, still composed, but the shift in her energy was clear enough that even casual viewers might pick up on it. It wasn't coldness exactly, it was distance. Butler, for his part, appeared unbothered. If anything, he seemed more relaxed than before, leaning back in his chair and laughing easily at Fallon's jokes. He didn't reference his earlier comment again, but there was a certain satisfaction in his demeanor, as though he knew exactly how much space the moment would occupy in the headlines by morning. As the show wrapped and the closing applause filled the studio, Meghan stood, exchanged polite handshakes, and exited the stage with her team moving quickly around her. No backstage mingling, no casual photos with the other guests, just a direct route to her dressing room, where her personal security was already stationed. The ride from the studio to her hotel was quiet at first, the city lights flickering across the tinted windows as her phone buzzed with notifications. Social media was already ablaze. Hashtags related to the remark were trending. Clips were being edited and reposted with captions ranging from disbelief to open mockery. Some defenders were already pushing back, calling out Butler for crossing a line, but the damage was done. Her PR handler broke the silence with a measured tone. "We need to decide before sunrise if we're putting out a statement or letting this pass." Meghan didn't answer right away. She knew this wasn't just about one night on television. It was about what came next and how this moment would fit into the broader narrative of her public life. In the hours that followed, while the city slept and the internet churned, the clip from The Tonight Show replayed endlessly on phones, laptops, and televisions around the world. The delivery, the reaction, the aftermath. All of it now frozen in pixels, dissected from every possible angle. By morning, Meghan would wake to headlines in every major entertainment outlet, and the world would be talking not about her philanthropic work, her upcoming projects, or anything she had prepared to discuss, but about one sentence from Austin Butler, delivered in front of a live studio audience, that changed the course of the night entirely. By the time dawn broke over Manhattan, the incident from The Tonight Show had already metastasized into something far larger than an awkward exchange on late-night television. Screens across the globe were replaying the clip in an endless loop, framed in every possible light, depending on the outlet's bias. Entertainment blogs leaned into the shock value, headline after headline proclaiming the moment Austin Butler stunned Meghan Markle into silence. Tabloids splashed still images of her reaction alongside lurid captions, some implying scandal, others hinting at Hollywood secrets finally surfacing. The speed was dizzying. Social media accounts with millions of followers clipped the remark and stripped away the surrounding context, leaving only the delivery and Meghan's split-second response. It became a soundbite, easily shareable, instantly memorable, and infinitely open to interpretation. On Twitter, hashtags bearing both their names trended simultaneously, with one camp defending Meghan against what they saw as a misogynistic attack, and another insisting Butler had simply said what everyone was already thinking. TikTok was even worse. Creators stitched the clip into reaction videos, inserting exaggerated facial expressions, commentary, and sometimes even old paparazzi photos of Meghan from her Hollywood days to bolster speculative narratives. Mainstream media couldn't resist. Morning talk shows ran segments replaying the footage, their hosts feigning surprise while fueling the conversation. Was it a joke that went too far, or a calculated dig? One anchor asked, before turning to a panel of celebrity behavior experts to analyze the tone of Butler's voice and Meghan's microexpressions. They slowed the footage down, zoomed in on her blink, speculated on whether the tightening of her lips indicated anger or embarrassment. Within hours, international outlets joined the frenzy. British tabloids, ever hungry for anything that could dent Meghan's credibility, ran with the story under headlines that read like veiled accusations. They pulled in quotes from anonymous Hollywood insiders, claiming the remark had roots in real gossip from her acting days. American publications were more split. Some framed Butler as reckless and cruel. Others positioned him as refreshingly unfiltered in an era of overly managed celebrity interviews. Meghan's name was everywhere, but almost none of it was tied to what she had intended to promote during her appearance. The philanthropic project she'd been there to highlight barely got a mention in most coverage. Instead, she was once again the subject of a public trial conducted across television studios, podcasts, and the endless scroll of online commentary. Podcasts devoted to celebrity culture wasted no time recording emergency episodes. Hosts speculated on the dynamics between Meghan and Butler, digging through old event photos to find any frame where the two might have crossed paths. Some claimed it was evidence of a long-simmering tension. Others suggested Butler was simply capitalizing on Meghan's polarizing public image to generate buzz for himself. On YouTube, Commentators churned out 10-minute breakdowns with titles engineered for clicks, often featuring thumbnails of Meghan looking distressed juxtaposed with Butler smirking. The ripple effect extended beyond entertainment media. Opinion writers weighed in, using the moment as a springboard to discuss sexism in Hollywood, the blurred line between comedy and cruelty, and the difficulty women face in controlling their narratives once they've been sexualized in the public eye. Meghan's supporters highlighted these think pieces on social media, rallying behind her with hashtags calling for accountability. But just as many detractors countered with threads compiling past tabloid rumors, framing Butler's comment as an unvarnished truth. In PR circles, the move was being dissected as a case study in live interview volatility. Industry veterans debated how Meghan's team should respond: issue a direct rebuttal, subtly redirect the conversation with a controlled media appearance, or maintain silence and allow the story to burn itself out. Each option carried its own risks. A statement could reignite the news cycle and keep the phrase "intimate plaything" alive in headlines for another week. Silence could be read as acquiescence. Even a carefully crafted redirection, say, a philanthropic stunt or an exclusive interview about unrelated topics, risked being undermined if reporters brought the incident up again. Austin Butler, meanwhile, seemed untouched by the chaos. Paparazzi caught him the next morning leaving a cafe in the West Village, dressed in a simple jacket and sunglasses, smiling as he signed autographs for fans. When asked by a reporter about the Tonight Show remark, he offered a shrug and a cryptic, "People take things too seriously sometimes." That single sentence was enough to reignite the conversation all over again, with some taking it as proof he had meant every word, and others claiming it was all in good fun. The imbalance in the fallout was stark. Butler's reputation wasn't in jeopardy. If anything, the controversy only fueled his profile in a way that late-night appearances rarely do. For Meghan, however, it was another layer of public scrutiny piled atop an already heavy history of invasive coverage. The remark had opened a door she had spent years trying to close, and now strangers across the world were debating her personal life as if it were a public commodity. Even outlets sympathetic to her were inadvertently amplifying the damage by repeating the line in their coverage. Every time a journalist or commentator referred back to Butler's words, they reinforced the association in the public consciousness. It didn't matter if they were condemning it. The phrase was becoming embedded, part of the cultural conversation about Meghan, whether she liked it or not. By midday, the incident had reached the point where even those who hadn't watched the show knew the gist of what had happened. It was no longer about whether the remark was appropriate. It had evolved into a multi-front debate about gender, power, and the ethics of live entertainment. But beneath all the noise, one thing remained certain. The original meaning of Meghan's appearance, the reason she had been there at all, had been buried under the avalanche of speculation and outrage. Her team, gathered in her hotel suite, scrolled through the coverage in silence, the weight of the decision ahead pressing on everyone. The question wasn't just how to respond, but whether a response could undo any of the damage at all. And somewhere, in the back of Meghan's mind, the doubt crept in, not about the truth of who she was, but about whether the truth even mattered once a narrative like this took hold. The flurry of coverage in the hours following the Tonight Show appearance wasn't just coming from the obvious places: celebrity news outlets, gossip blogs, or fan accounts. Whispers began surfacing from behind the closed doors of the show's production offices, trickling out in fragments through anonymous tips, text messages, and the occasional too-casual conversation overheard in the corners of industry parties. The kind of chatter that travels fast in media circles, where everyone knows someone who was in the room. It started with small details, pieces that might seem trivial to anyone outside the business. A crew member mentioned how Meghan had arrived at the studio earlier than expected, avoiding the main entrance entirely, and being ushered through a side corridor rarely used for high-profile guests. Another recalled that Butler had been unexpectedly added to the guest lineup late in the week, a change that hadn't been part of the original schedule circulated to staff. The late addition immediately raised questions. In the world of network television, surprise bookings rarely happen without a specific purpose, and sometimes that purpose is less about promotion than about creating a moment worth talking about. One production assistant claimed that during rehearsals earlier in the day, Fallon had teased Butler about saving something juicy for the show. Whether this was a half-joking nudge or a deliberate prompt was impossible to verify, but in hindsight, it gave weight to the idea that Butler's remark might not have been entirely spontaneous. Then there were the murmurs from inside Meghan's own team. According to one staffer, the energy in her dressing room before the show was focused but tense. They had anticipated some light ribbing. Late-night hosts often play off existing media narratives, but no one expected the kind of pointed comment Butler delivered. The remark caught not only Meghan off guard, but also her publicist, who had spent the day mapping out responses to predictable topics. The royal family, life in California, and her ongoing charity work. There was no contingency plan for an insinuation of that magnitude. Another account came from someone who claimed to have been stationed just offstage during the live taping. They said Meghan's demeanor visibly shifted the moment Butler leaned toward his microphone, that she seemed to brace herself before the words even landed, as though some part of her sensed they wouldn't be harmless. After the comment, during the applause, she reportedly sat back in her chair with the kind of stillness that reads as composure on camera but feels like calculation in person. Perhaps the most intriguing claims came from a member of the technical crew. They insisted that during the commercial break following the remark, Meghan left the stage faster than any guest they had seen in recent months. While a makeup artist trailed her with a powder brush, her publicist was already speaking urgently into a phone, pacing in tight circles. Butler, in contrast, lingered near Fallon's desk, chatting casually with the host and sipping from a coffee cup as though the moment had been nothing more than an amusing beat in the night's show. Some crew members believed the control room had considered cutting the remark entirely. There was precedent. Controversial lines are occasionally removed from the final broadcast if producers feel they could lead to backlash. But others argued that the viral potential was too high to ignore, and in the cutthroat landscape of late-night television ratings, viral moments often take precedence over guest comfort. In the end, the decision to leave it in appeared to have been unanimous among the senior producers. One unnamed source went further, hinting that Butler's remark might have been a calculated move on his part. According to them, the actor had been unusually quiet in the green room before the taping, scrolling through his phone and occasionally jotting something in the Notes app. This wasn't unusual behavior for a guest preparing anecdotes for a show, but they claimed he seemed to be weighing his words with particular care. There were also reports of a brief, private exchange between Meghan and Butler after the show ended, just out of view of the main hallway, but within earshot of a few staffers. The details were fuzzy. Some said Meghan's tone was clipped but controlled. Others insisted it carried a flash of genuine anger. Butler's response, according to one account, was a low chuckle followed by, "It's just TV. You know how it works." If this interaction happened as described, it revealed a sharp divide in how the two interpreted the stakes of that moment. The more these behind-the-scenes details leaked, the more they fueled speculation online. For Meghan's defenders, they painted a picture of a guest blindsided by a co-star who either underestimated or ignored the impact of his words. For her critics, they added an air of drama to a narrative they already believed, that she was constantly at odds with the media because she couldn't take a joke. Meanwhile, those in the entertainment industry who understood the mechanics of booking, scripting, and editing saw a more calculated picture. Talk shows, like any media platform, thrive on unpredictable moments. If a guest says something that will trend the next morning, it's a win for the network, the host, and sometimes even the guest themselves. In that sense, Butler's remark had been the perfect storm. Controversial enough to spark outrage, ambiguous enough to be defended as humor, and delivered in a context where the cameras were rolling and the stakes were high. By the end of the week, whispers from inside The Tonight Show hinted at internal debates about how far they had gone in chasing the moment. Some producers reportedly fielded calls from Meghan's representatives expressing concern about the framing of the clip on social media accounts linked to the show. Others defended the segment, insisting it had played exactly as intended. A playful back and forth that was being blown out of proportion by the internet's tendency to latch onto sound bites. Regardless of which version was closest to the truth, the behind-the-scenes accounts did one thing without fail. They kept the story alive. Every new detail, every whispered retelling, added another layer to the narrative. ensuring that what happened on that stage would not fade quietly into the endless churn of celebrity news. In the days that followed, the reaction within the royal circles was as telling as the media firestorm outside them. While Meghan had long since stepped back from her official royal duties, the institution's gaze on her had never truly faded. Anything she did, any word said about her, especially something as provocative as Butler's comment, had the potential to ripple into palace discussions, even if they were behind closed doors. According to those familiar with the undercurrents of palace politics, the footage of the Tonight Show exchange reached key members of the royal household within hours. Clips circulated on secure internal lines, not unlike the way they moved through social media. Except here, they came with terse notes from aides flagging significant reputational implications. It wasn't that the palace was surprised Meghan had been the target of a public jab. Such moments had happened before, but the specific nature of the remark and the international reach of its broadcast made it impossible to ignore. Inside Buckingham Palace, some senior courtiers reportedly saw the incident as yet another example of why distancing from Meghan had been both inevitable and strategically necessary. The more traditional voices in the household viewed the late-night setting itself as problematic. In their eyes, no serious royal figure would place themselves in such a volatile environment, where a single remark could ignite controversy. These were the same figures who had frowned upon her candid interviews in the past, believing that openness was too often met with opportunism. But not everyone saw it in purely critical terms. There were those, fewer in number but still influential, who recognized that Meghan's treatment on that stage had been deeply inappropriate, regardless of personal opinions about her. One source claimed that Princess Anne, known for her no-nonsense demeanor, privately remarked that such an insinuation made on live television was beyond the pale. Though not necessarily a supporter of Meghan's media strategies, and was said to have little tolerance for what she considered unfair or disrespectful public behavior. Prince Harry's reaction, unsurprisingly, was sharper. People close to him said he was furious when he saw the clip. While he had grown used to tabloids and commentators taking shots at Meghan, this was different. This was a targeted remark delivered to her face, in front of a live audience, with millions watching. For Harry, it crossed a line into personal humiliation. Reports from those in his circle suggested that he immediately began reaching out to contacts to assess what options they had in terms of pushing back, whether that meant issuing a statement, demanding an on-air apology, or confronting Butler directly. However, the palace's broader response was more measured, shaped by years of institutional experience in weathering scandals. They knew that inserting themselves into a media storm could prolong its life rather than diminish it. If the royal family had one consistent approach to public relations, it was the art of strategic silence. Still, that didn't mean there weren't private conversations happening, or that the incident wouldn't be quietly factored into their ongoing assessment of Meghan and Harry's public roles. In certain corners of the royal apparatus, there was speculation about whether this latest controversy might influence the couple's standing in future royal events or negotiations. Although Harry remained a prince by birth, his and Meghan's status within the hierarchy was no longer fixed in the way it once was. Each public episode, especially one with global reach, was weighed for how it reflected on the monarchy as a whole. Across the Atlantic, the British press seized on the notion of palace reaction. Tabloids claimed unnamed sources inside the royal household were shaking their heads at Meghan's choice of platform, suggesting that her willingness to engage in the late-night circuit only invited this kind of treatment. The more sensational outlets went further, spinning the narrative into something almost conspiratorial, implying that her appearance might have been part of a broader attempt to rehabilitate her image in the U.S., only to have it backfire spectacularly. Meanwhile, royal commentators filled television slots and column inches with analysis, drawing on everything from body language to historical precedent. Some reminded viewers of the countless times royal figures had been mocked or criticized in public, from awkward interview moments to biting sketches on comedy shows, and argued that the institution had always endured such slights with composure. Others pointed out that Meghan's position was fundamentally different. She was no longer shielded by the protocols and PR machinery of the palace, making her far more vulnerable to the kind of targeted hit Butler had delivered. In this context, the remark took on another layer of meaning. It wasn't just a celebrity taking a swipe at another celebrity. It was, in the eyes of many, a public reminder of Meghan's altered status. She was no longer an untouchable duchess under the full protective canopy of the crown. She was an independent public figure, subject to the same ruthless rules of Hollywood relevance and late-night entertainment as anyone else. Behind the walls of Windsor and Clarence House, the debate over how, if at all, to address the matter remained unresolved. Some argued for a discreet show of solidarity, perhaps through a carefully worded statement about respecting public figures. Others insisted that any acknowledgement would be a mistake, lending undue weight to something that could otherwise fade. What no one could deny was that the incident had reignited discussion of Meghan's place in the royal narrative, not just in the press, but among those who shaped the monarchy's image from within. Whether they liked her or not, she remained tethered to the royal brand, and moments like the Tonight Show exchange had the power to influence how that brand was perceived on a global scale.